Hey Procrastinators, today we are celebrating Kiana the Craft Therapist 500 subscribers on YouTube. This is exciting, and she has got 5 giveaways for you to win. So here are the giveaways, and there will be more details in my description box below. She will be announcing the winner on her channel, and I will have her channel in the description box below as well. Here are the cards that we are going to create today, and I am doing a Cricut versus ScanNCut video today, and not a lot of people know that you can sort of cut your stamps out with the Cricut. I mean, it's a little backwards, but we'll get into that. So I'm going to start with the ScanNCut portion. We're going to be cutting a decorative edge on our cards to match our stamping. So I'm going to stamp out my decorative edge here first. I'm going to do a little bit of masking. We're using the Simon Says stamp. Let's see, we're using the Simon Says stamp Stronger Together stamp set. It took me a minute there. So I'm just stamping out the first little floral stamp in this set, and then I'm going to stack it on itself to make a longer decorative edge for my card. And I am using a 12 by 12 piece of paper here, and I cut it in half so it's 6 by 12. And I did make some little marks on the edge so I could so I'm going to be cutting this down to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch side folding card. So I did make little marks on the edge so I stay within my 5 1/2 inch size here. So you can't see those on camera obviously, but I am trying to keep my stamping within those markings. But in order for the ScanNCut to cut out the entire card base for me, I did need to start out with a larger piece of cardstock. So I did my stamping, and now I'm just going to remove my masks here. And then I did cut this down a little bit before I put it into the ScanNCut because it doesn't really like to scan images really close to the edge. So I did need to back off my stamped image a little bit. So I have it scanned, and then I sent it to the Canvas software. And so there was a little bit of the edge of the paper that the scanner picked up. So I'm just getting rid of those marks there. So I just went to the layers panel and I deleted those marks. And it seems like my image is in 2 pieces, so I just didn't want to get rid of those pieces, if that makes any sense. So I want to keep the floral image. Now I'm going to put a rectangle onto the mat to make my card base. So I'm just lining it up with my flowers here. And then I want to make it so the floral image plus that rectangle is the size of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card base. And then I realized that I do kind of want a white edge around my flowers, so I am adding the offset there. And then I'm going to hide the original floral image. Now the important thing to note here is that when you're doing this, do not move the flower image on your mat, because remember, you have the original stamped image over on your mat sitting on the ScanNCut right now, and it is going to eventually cut out that floral image in the end. So you do not want to move this while you're working in the Canvas software. So now I'm just going to sit here and fiddle around until I get the appropriate size of a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card with, you know, the floral image plus this rectangle needs to make a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card. So you need it to be 5 1/2 by 8 1/2. So I don't really know there's got to be an easier way to do that, but I don't know the easier way. So I just sat there and fiddled around until my images, those 2 images together, made that size. So now I have, when I made the offset, this little bottom part here that I'm working on now, that ended up being longer than 5 1/2 inches. So now I'm just doing some node editing to make that even with the bottom of my card. I'm just deleting those nodes, is all I'm doing here. So now I've got it. No, I guess I don't got it yet. Usually I wouldn't voice over this part, but I was working in my craft room that day. My craft room's in the basement. It's cold. I had the pellet stove on, and my microphone will pick up the pellet stove noise, and it sounds like crap. I have done a video with it with the pellet stove on. I really wasn't that happy with it, but I didn't want to redo the video. So, yeah. So now I'm just going to weld those two pieces together. I have it close enough to 5 1/4 by 8 1/2 that I was happy enough with it. So I welded the two pieces together. Now I have this little line between those two stems, and I'm just going to delete that because otherwise it will cut that line, and I really didn't want it to cut the line. So I'm just going to delete that, and then I believe when we're done deleting those little nodes, we are going to send this back over to the Brother ScanNCut. I did not include the footage. Well, actually, I didn't even record it, but I didn't include footage of me sending the images to and from the ScanNCut and the computer. But if there are any people that are unsure of how to do all that, I can set up a camera and show how to do that portion. I just figured that people that have a ScanNCut probably already know how to do that. So I did want to include a little bit of coloring in today's video because it is part of the card making process. I'm only going to color this one flower. So I'm using my Inktense pencils today, and I am starting with the darkest color towards the, well, actually this is not the darkest color. This is actually my mid-tone color. I lie. So I'm starting with my mid-tone color and starting at the bottom. I had originally intended this being my darkest color, but it didn't end up being that way. So this is my lightest color. It is mallard green, and I'm just going to put it at the top of the petals. I did not extend it all the way. And then I'm adding my water, and this is 100-pound cardstock. It is not, usually I prefer to do Bristol Smooth, but I was being cheap and I didn't want to waste my Bristol Smooth for a whole card base. So you can use your Inktense pencils on 100-pound cardstock. It will not blend quite as nicely, and you need to be very, very careful with your water use. So I am just blending it out here. And then I decided when I was done blending this out that I needed a darker color for my shadows. So I'm just going to show the top view here real quick that I'm just taking the darkest color, and I'm taking my water, my paintbrush, and taking it to the tip of the brush, or taking to the tip of pencil if I could talk today. And then I'm just adding a little bit of that darkest color to the shadows. And now we're back obviously to the second camera view, just because I wanted to show you exactly how I was adding it to the shadow areas. And then now we're going to stamp. Now I did add this ink blended circle because of time purposes for this hop. I did not show the ink blending on this card for the circle, but I will show it on the next card, which I did a heart instead of a circle. So I'm just stamping my sentiment, and the sentiment was from the Stronger Together card, or Simon Says Stamp Stronger Together stamp set, I believe. And then I just added some sequins to finish it off, and those are from Nuvo. And oh, and I did add some aqua shimmer pen to my flowers, which I did not show on camera either. Now we're going to move on to the second card, which is very similar to the first, except we're using the Cricut machine. Now I use SureCuts a lot for most of my designing with Cricut. So we're going to scan in the image. Now I cheated and used my first card as my image, but what you would normally do is stamp your image out on a piece of scrap paper. If you don't want to use a masked image like I did, you could use your acetate sheet for your stamp sets, which would work actually perfectly. But because I decided to make my own image with masking, I just used the previous card instead of wasting a piece of scrap paper. So when you scan in your image and you're doing a trace, you need to select what color you want to trace. I wanted to use the black lines for the stamped image. So I double clicked that little white box next to the, what does that say, mode or something like that. And then I selected my black lines, and then you just sit there and play with the numbers next to contrast until you get a solid red line on the color that you're tracing, which would, in my case, would be black. And you want the most solid image that you can get. Now, when I got done tracing, I had these little extraneous lines. It happens sometimes, not a big deal. I took the eraser tool and I erased them. I'm going to zoom in here a minute and just kind of make sure that there's nothing funny going on with my image. Sometimes you get little funny things going on. It just happens. I'm going to, I do want, again, a shadow image behind my, or around my flowers like I did with the ScanNCut. So I'm just going to do a shadow layer here. And I'm making it 0.1 like I did with the Brother ScanNCut. And I just changed the color on my shadow image just so I could differentiate it from the original layer. Now when I did the shadow image, here's where you can see that I do have a little funny things going on a little bit, because I did not get a perfect trace. It happens sometimes because I am scanning a stamped image, and the Cricut software is not perfect. So I'm just deleting some nodes, doing some node editing just like I did with the ScanNCut, and I'm just going to delete some of these nodes. Now if you see there, if the nodes all turn blue and you hit delete, you're going to delete your entire image. So I just undid that and got my shadow layer back. So I'm just going to continue to edit some nodes until my image is how I want it. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did with the other image in the ScanNCut software. We're going to add a rectangle. Well, I guess I'm going to fiddle around with the nodes a little bit more. It is a little bit more fiddly when you do it this way. Oh, I didn't mention that I did scan this in with a regular scanner from a printer, because again, the Cricut does not have a scanner on it like the ScanNCut does. All right, so now I'm going to add my rectangle, I believe. And this one, you can move this around anywhere on your mat. It does not matter because, again, the Cricut does not have a scanner. So now I'm going to add my rectangle. I'm going to change the size on this. I believe I'm going to change the color here in a minute too, just so I can differentiate the two pieces and see what I'm doing. And we're just estimating sizes here because, again, I'm going to have to fiddle around with it a little bit to get the two pieces to make the size of a A2 card base. So, yeah, I'm changing the color, and then we're going to fiddle around with it again. And if I knew a way to make this easier, I would. If somebody has a way to make this easier, that would be great. I don't know. I guess I'm just not good with math and visual things like that. But so I did have a little bit easier time with this one than I did in the ScanNCut software. I think it's because I had the X and Y axis. There we go. On this one to play around. I'm not as good with the ScanNCut software as I am with the Cricut and the Cricut. I've only had my ScanNCut for about a month now, I believe. But I was able to get this lined up a little bit easier. And again, my image, we're not there yet. Again, my image was a little bit too long when I added the shadow layer, so I will have to fix that up at the bottom in a minute. But we're just going to get it the right length first, or width, I mean. So I'm just, again, fiddling around. It is a little fiddly doing this, but I did think that the cards turned out beautiful with that cut edge on the side to match my stamping. And, you know, the Cricut is going to be a bit more fiddly. We will talk about that in a minute once we get the card base cut, because again, you're not actually cutting the stamped image. So I welded it together, and then we're going to go down here and mess with this. Now I should have got rid of the look of the two stems there. I actually didn't on this one, but I should have. I don't know why I didn't. I wasn't paying attention. But so this one does have the separation of the two stems on there, but it turned out fine in the end. It's not a big deal, but you can delete those nodes and get rid of the separation of the two stems. On this one, I ended up having little gaps there. I did get rid of those. Otherwise, you will have those two little holes in the card. It's not a big deal, but I did get rid of them. And then we're going to save this and take it to the Cricut. If you're not familiar with the Cricut software, you do need to export it as an SVG. You do not hit save, you export it as an SVG. If you save it, you're just saving it as the native Cricut software file. Make sure you click the Cricut Design Space Compatible checkbox, and then we're uploading it into the Cricut software. And then I did not put a score line in it in the Cricut a lot software. I kind of forgot, but that's easily added here in Design Space. I'm just going to make it 5.5 inches wide and center it, or long, I mean, and center it. And then make sure you attach it, and then we can hit make it. And then I had my machine cut it. And then now we're going to stamp the images onto the card base. And so, like I said, it can be done, but it's a little backwards with the Cricut because you can't actually cut around the stamped image. You have to kind of put it in and then make an SVG file for it. You could also do it as a print and cut. There is a way to do it as a print and cut if that's what you would prefer. The print and cut sizes are restricted, so you would have to work within the print and cut sizes. I believe it is 6.5 by 9.25 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. So you would have to work within those restricted sizes of the print and cut is the only issue with that. So I just prefer to have my images actually stamped though. And there are some angel policies with stamp companies where they don't like you to mechanically stamp like that. So I just prefer to actually stamp my images instead of using the print and cut way. All right, so now we're going to talk about this ink blended heart on here. I had made some of those masking stencils that some companies are coming out with the engraved lines on them, and you can line them up with your card. We're not actually going to use them that way today because my card is off center with those hearts, but I am going to use them to mask an ink blend. So I started off with chipped sapphire, and we're just going to go around the very edges of the heart with the chipped sapphire. And then with this one, I did fiddle around with the colors a bit more than I did with the other one that you saw with the circle. I only used 2 colors with the circle, but this one I fiddled around because I did not wipe off my ink on the stencil, so it pulled it out. And I got a darker color of the shaded lilac than I had intended. See, the shaded lilac is not very light there. So I wanted more purple, and so I pulled out wilted violet and kind of brightened up the purple there in the center, but then it matched the chipped sapphire way too much still. So I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? Now I'm going to bring out the dusty concord and kind of try to make it more purple. I'm like, all right, well, it's very purple now, but now what am I going to do? So I brought out the chipped sapphire again and went around the edges to darken up those edges. And I'm like, okay, well, the edges are dark, but there's still just not enough contrast. So what I do here when my ink blending does not have enough contrast and I'm working with dark colors is I bring out the black soot. And you're thinking, heart with black? What are you thinking, Amanda? But it works, trust me. So we're going to just ink blend the black soot just around the edges. And when I pull off this mask, you will see that there is a lot of contrast and it almost glows in the center of that heart. Wipe off my stencil so I don't have any accidents. And then when I pull that off, it glows. And I magically stamped the Miss You in the center and white heat embossed it. I've got my sequins and my sparkle on the flowers, and it's beautiful. So be sure you check out the next person in the hop, which will be linked in my description box below. All the information for the giveaways will be in my description box below. Kiana's channel will be linked in my description box below. And as always, have a great day.